keeping us keeping it together, keeping the wheels on the bus as we yes, as we wrap up Fair Housing Month this year. And again, really great to be here along with Khalid Bryant. I am the association's chief legal counsel. Khalid does, as you will find out by the end of the series this year, and if you watch last year's series, you already know, he has a wealth of knowledge on getting Section 8 deals done, the logistics of it, the how-tos, the messaging. So we are really lucky to have him here today because, you know, legal is all fun and games until it's not. But you all are going to get both the legal and the practical. So, all right, what is today? So in the past couple of webinars that we did this year, Khalid led with what is, what's a voucher? How do you use it? Some of the bureaucratic challenges that one might face and how to overcome them, not insurmountable, right? And today we're going to talk some more about, we're definitely going to cover Section 8, right? But this is also going to be a little bit broader in terms of fair housing generally, right? And again, we will have a heavy emphasis on Section 8 because that is one of the top types of violations that we do see in the top, one of the top highly litigated issues that we see in fair housing. So before we get started, of course, the disclaimer that we have to give you, which is this is for educational purposes only. This is not legal advice. It's not representation. So, of course, if you have any questions about your unique situation, you should seek your own legal counsel or call the Florida Realtors Legal Hotline. If you have hypothetical questions or things that you would like to pose in the chat, please drop them in the chat as we go along. We will be answering questions. And at the end, if we don't get your questions throughout, we will answer them at the end. Okay, so today, what are we going to be talking about? Again, we're going to be talking about from a high level, the context, why this is important. We're going to talk about some definitions because it's important when you talk about the legal cases that we're going to talk about to have a fundamental understanding of some of these definitions. And then we're going to talk about how to not not violate fair housing laws, right? And one of the antidotes to that is properly screening tenants. So we are going to jump right into it. Okay, some context. What is this all about? Well, fair housing it stems from a set of protections. Fair housing laws stem from a set of protections under federal and state laws that have various definitions of protected classes in them, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But there are different laws that provide fair housing protections. And how are we landing here today? Well, we started this fair housing training with Khalid, both from the practical standpoint that we need to make sure that our members know how to work with individuals who have vouchers, but also from the standpoint of there have been a lot of lawsuits around fair housing violations over the years, and they come and go, they ebb and flow. And the topics that you'll see today are the ones that we've seen the most over the years. So they are evergreen. All right. So first, what makes up a fair housing claim, right? So we talk about fair housing and it's not what it used to be, right? It's not usually, let me say usually, it's not usually so obvious now, right? Where somebody will say, I say usually, but now I'm contradicting myself in my head. I have had clients, right, where the landlord has said to me or my clients directly, and this is a direct quote from one of those landlords, I'm not going to rent to you Section 8 cockroaches anymore, right? Like that is very clear housing discrimination. Why? Well, you are discriminating against somebody based on their source of income, probably, and definitely in my case, it dealt with race, and all of the and just like that's awful, right? Like gut reaction is that is just awful. So yeah, that is a discriminatory effect. And what's the effect? Well, that landlord wasn't going to rent to my client. And so we hear about discriminatory effect, and that is the most obvious. What is not always obvious and what leads to a lot of litigation now is the impact that one's behaviors or actions have on a protected class of people. So, for example, if you have not seen the Newsweek series on, or Newsday, I'm sorry, on fair housing, Long Island Divided, it's a quick YouTube watch, and it's about Section 8 housing discrimination. It was not that long ago, a few years ago, maybe 5 years ago at this point. And so these were testers that went in, it was in New York, and they're allowed to do one-way videotaping. So in Florida, you have to have dual consent, right? No, informed consent when you're recording somebody, not in New York, right? So these testers went in with like undercover cameras and were like, secret shoppers for Section 8. And the things that they uncovered with real estate agents was particularly harrowing. This is with the Long Island Board of Realtors. And this was not that long ago. And what was the discriminatory effect? Well, people with vouchers were not getting, they were not getting services. They weren't getting access to realtors' services. Really not good, right? What other discriminatory effects? Well, we're going to talk about how criminal records, right? Sometimes landlords are allowed to say, you can require a background check, no problem. But if there's a policy in place that says you can't have any criminal records or arrests, that policy is going to, you may not be saying, I'm not going to rent to a protected class of people. You are not saying that explicitly, but the impact and the effect of it, right, is that you are probably impacting a protected class of people based on race. And we'll talk about that too in a little bit. So look, there are in Long Island Divided, that particular expose, there were some good intentions, there were some not good intentions when you watch it. But, even when there are good intentions, like you would think, a business practice like saying no criminal records because you want to make sure it's a safe community, that is, a safe, the intention is good, right? Like, who doesn't want to live in a safe community, right? But when you are applying it in such a way that it has a discriminatory effect, that's when it becomes a problem. So, all right.
I'm sorry. I just have a quick question I wanted to add just for clarity so everyone is understanding on this. When you say no criminal record, if I'm not mistaken, when it comes to qualifying a tenant, you can't deny just for an arrest. It has to be a felony conviction because in Florida, you're innocent until proven guilty. So even though they were arrested, they didn't do anything. What did they do? What were they convicted of? So that's the thing we all have to be clear on. And it's not just buyer and tenants agents. Listing agents need to understand this as well so they can inform their clients, because that's half of the battle. Even if we're working with them and trying to bring them in, if the listing agents don't get it, they're not going to know how to get, you get it. Sorry. Thank you.
Yeah, no. That's great. And Khalid, what do you do, right? When you are working with an owner, right? A landlord, and the owner comes and, you're signing them up and they say, I don't want to rent to anybody with a voucher. Like, what do you do?
Well, I'm already kind of prepped to cancel the listing, but I'll still try to save it. I'll still try to explain and educate them. That's the biggest thing we need to do is educate our clients, because we're just not doing it. So I'll explain the benefits of working with Section 8. I'll explain all of my experiences and things that I did encounter as this may go wrong or this may happen. And here's how we fix it. Here's how we avoid it from happening again. As far as the inspection process, I don't mean with the tenants. I mean, I failed inspection once because this wasn't in line. So I know, let's make sure this is in line. If they still won't get it, then I just can't take the listing, because what am I going to do? I can't do everything possible to get this property rented because there's a whole category of people you're not allowing me to work with. I can't do it. I can't do my job to the best of my abilities.
That, and you then have significant liability, right? Because if you are taking a listing and you're aiding and abetting, a fair housing violation, there are very clear remedies under the law that you as the agents, you are not just a tool, right? Like, you have very clear liability under fair housing laws if you are aiding and abetting that kind of behavior. I
have a quick plug-in. Also, you're aiding and abetting if they tell you, I don't want to work with this, and you say, look, we can't deny for that, but we can have this qualifying criteria. To develop a qualifying criteria that you feel, number one, is fair, cool, but if you feel that it will exclude a certain I would like to say community, a certain group from applying, that is also discrimination because you're setting it up that you know they can't qualify.
Right. It's a pretext. Right.
Mhm.
Exactly. And so if the impact, so you can set it up however you want to set it up, and we'll talk about tenant screening too. But if your business practices are having a discriminatory effect, you could possibly face a fair housing case. Now, there are some exceptions to this, right? And so the exception is that if a practice is discriminatory, like the criminal records piece, right? And it's not motivated, let's, say the intent is good, right? You want to have a safe community, fine. It may still be lawful, and it is, if supported by a legally sufficient justification, and there can't be any less discriminatory options available to you. So for example, if you have a blanket ban on arrests and convictions for somebody renting your home, that has a discriminatory effect. And if you're thinking how, HUD released a memo, and we have a copy of it later in the presentation that you'll see. HUD released a memo that said, look, these types of bans are problematic because the impact that it's having on communities of color is more than it has on communities that are not, right? So that's race. That has a disparate impact on a protected class, which is race. Now, if you say, and the government, even in government housing, they have criminal record restrictions, but they have a look back period. So it's not it's not forever ago when you were 16 and did something foolish and had it expunged, right? I never had another infraction since. How long ago was it? How serious was it? What type of alleged criminal activity was it? What was the outcome? Was there a conviction, or was there something else that happened, right? I see a question in the chat around a DUI. Those are not typically not felonies. And a DUI can be usually a misdemeanor, right? And so if it is a misdemeanor, there's a difference between a felony and a misdemeanor, right? And the severity of the crime. How many cases, right? Was it a one-off thing? Was there rehabilitation, right? Were there all these other factors, mitigating circumstances that play into it that you need to be looking at, right? So, in public housing, like the one hard and fast rule they have is if you've been convicted of like cooking meth or selling it, like you're never going to be admitted. That's like a very hard and fast rule because of the very obvious dangers to the community around you. That would entail. Everybody's seen Breaking Bad, so so that is that's like one hard and fast rule. But even the government has very specific look back periods, severity of crimes, frequency, or even alleged crimes. And Khalid is absolutely right. Hands down, should not be holding an arrest against someone because you are innocent until you're proven guilty. So yeah.
I've used that to get a denied offer accepted. That's another thing. When your offer is denied, sometimes I try to push back if I don't believe it. I will ask why, on what, and I'll try to make sense, because sometimes they're just reading what I sent them wrong. I had a situation where someone tried to deny one of my rental applications because they saw on my tenants' bank statements they are at the casino every week. I told them I don't care if they're throwing money in the ocean. How much do they make? How much they have the money to go to the casino every week? Who cares? You can't look at things like that. So that's why sometimes I'll even tell my tenants when they're sending me their stuff to present, just send me the deposit section. I don't need to see your withdrawals. I don't see why they care, because they'll read it. If you send them that much information, they will look at it and see it's not their business. How much do you make? That's what we're proving.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Redact, deposits only. Totally agree. And the point in the chat is, and somebody in the chat's, talking about the DUI that was on a customer's record, and they were denied, even though it was years ago. Did all, paid a fine, community service, and to your point, Khalid, that's where you can advocate for your customer and say those things, like it was however long ago. Here's all these other mitigating circumstances. If there's any underlying issues with addiction or any other medical or mental health issues, it could be a fair housing violation if there are, disabilities that are implicated, like mental health issues that could come up. Could be fair housing discrimination based on that point. A crime in and of itself is not a protected class. So, or, So that in and of itself is not a protected class, and the Fair Housing Act and the Florida Fair Housing Act do not explicitly mention DUIs. We have to look beyond those pieces to the, discriminatory effect, whether there's legally sufficient justification for the discriminatory effect, and then go from there.
I like to ask myself, what are they supposed to be homeless? So if you ever wonder if there's someone that you may think is going to be difficult to close, still help, because just because they had a DUI, they're supposed to be homeless. Just because they need to use a Section 8 voucher, they're supposed to be homeless. Like, so they're moving into places. Someone's doing it. Why won't you take the time to figure out how to get it done? Sometimes you got to close a hard client. That makes you a good realtor.
I don't really know what to say after that, but yes. Yes. Yeah. All right, protected classes. We started talking about protected classes. And so what is a protected class? It's groups of people with a common characteristic who are legally protected from fair housing discrimination based on that characteristic. And protected classes are created by state, federal, and local laws. So we've got a little chart for you on the, my screen. All right, so we've got a little chart for you on the protected classes under federal, Florida, Miami-Dade, Broward, Palm Beach, and I think we have Martin County over here. Let me pull it. Yep. So you'll see that not every single municipality has the same exact protected classes. Why is that important? Well, you may have a fair housing claim in Broward County for, let's see, political affiliation or gender identity or expression or pregnancy, but that's not a protected class under the Federal Fair Housing Act. So it matters in terms of if you have a claim or your customer has a claim, where and how you can file or get sued for these for fair housing law discrimination. So this is a little chart that we've put together so that you can see sort of how they overlap and how they don't. And it's like a parfait, right? Like if you're having a parfait, you're having all the parfait. You're having the yogurt, the granola, the berries on top. It's a whole thing, right? It wouldn't be a parfait with all those without all of those pieces. You can't just carve some of these out, right? So if you are in Broward County, right? Protected classes disability or protected classes pregnancy, yeah, you're going to get covered there. You're going to be covered under the Florida Fair Housing Act for all of those pieces, and then of course the Federal Fair Housing Act for the rest. All right, source of income discrimination. We're going to roll through some of the different the most common types of fair housing cases that we see here at the association and in the realtor world, right? So number one is source of income discrimination. This usually comes up because of Section 8 vouchers, but it's not just Section 8, right? I've seen it come up in other ways, whether it's sometimes it's VA funding, sometimes it's from a shelter, right? A homeless shelter where, for example, a women's shelter who are survivors of domestic violence, right? And they give them vouchers or rental assistance, that's protected. So are things like SSI, disability income, SSDI from the government, all of those. And the standard is usually legally verifiable sources of income, right? So that is protected from source of income discrimination. The counties you see and municipalities that you see up on your screen, they all have source of income discrimination laws explicitly on the books. So you might be thinking, okay, cool. So if I've got a customer in, let's see, in Jacksonville, they're not on the list, right? Nope, not on the list. So if I've got a customer in Jacksonville, my landlord can say no, Section 8, wrong. Why is that? Well, we've been seeing lawsuits that are filed even in places that do not have source of income discrimination laws on the books. And if you're like, wow, how is that happening after we just talked about the different protected classes? Well, it's happening because we go back to the beginning. The practice is having a discriminatory effect on a protected class. Section 8 voucher holders tend to be families. They tend to be households led by women. They tend to be families of color, especially in South Florida. And so, we have to look at race, we have to look at familial status, we have to look at gender. All of those pieces come into play. So that's how the cases are being filed. They're being filed based on a theory of, it's what's called disparate impact, meaning your practice is having a disparate impact or a different impact on a protected class versus other protected classes. All right. That's some more background information on Section 8. All right. properly screening tenants. So one of the antidotes to this is, Section 8 source of income discrimination is making sure that and other types of fair housing discrimination, and some of this information is old. So, oh no, this is current. I'm sorry, I saw a date, but it's an old webinar, but it's still very current. These are resources this is a screening checklist that we've put together that you can roll through to make sure that you are doing what you need to do under fair housing laws. What can you do? So first things first, right? You need to make sure you have a policy, a written policy that you consistently follow and update it regularly, right? So if you are working, if you're only doing, commercial work, right? Then, put that in writing somewhere, like, right, the scope of our brokerage's services include this, they don't include that, right? So make sure it's really clear what you're doing. Make sure that you have clear processes and procedures for how you screen tenants, right? So accept all applications, make sure that you are asking for the same things of the same people, because it's not just about access to housing, it's how you're treating people, right? So if you're asking people with Section 8 vouchers to provide you with bank statements that show their expenditures as well as their deposits, but you don't require that of anyone else, that's discrimination, right? That's going to be discrimination. There was a case that Hope Fair Housing, which is a local advocacy group that both tests and brings lawsuits based on housing discrimination. They had a case where the landlord asked the woman to provide a sonogram. She was very visibly pregnant. The landlord asked her for a picture of her sonogram to make sure that there weren't, triplets or twins or something like that for housing occupancy regulations, right? So not okay. Like, that's discrimination too.
That sounds bad. Yeah. I just want to, okay, I want to add something to that and address this question. So to add to what you're saying, a lot of times, like, it's not about you thinking you're being discriminatory or you just telling yourself, I'm not. If the person feels away from what you did, even if you're not portraying it that way, it's about how you make people feel. If they feel away and want to take it up there, they can. So you just have to be mindful of how you're talking to people. Another thing I just want to bring to people's attention is oftentimes people using Section 8 vouchers are families. Oftentimes it's single parents. So when they come to these showings to meet you or try to call you about this property, they're sometimes teenage kids who are very comprehensive of what's going on, is sitting right there or standing right there watching you have this encounter. So when they're watching how you're talking down on their parent or just not willing to help, they get that feeling like, why does no one want to help my mom? So imagine what that does to this generation coming up and how they're going to view you. You don't want to be the person to put that negativity in someone's mind. On this question, though, someone says, in a nutshell, they submitted 10 contracts to lease. None of them get accepted, and they cannot get a response back from the listing agents. This actually happens to me a lot. Even tell me if I'm doing the right thing here. What I do in times like this is, if I continue to reach out to you and you're not responding to getting my offer, I'll figure out your broker's email address and I'm going to send it to you and your broker now. And then I'm going to call your broker and say, hey, I know this is your listing as well. I'm trying to get this offer presented. I don't know if they're presenting it. It's really, it's important that they present this offer from sending it to them. Can you please reach out to this person and just see if this offer was presented so I know what to tell my client, and let them figure it out. And if it escalates from there, then I guess even I'll kind of come in and tell you what you should do from there. If you just feel like you're being ignored because you have a Section 8 client, they can't do that. They can't do that.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with doing that, Khalid. If that is your business practice and you do that with everyone that comes up with, yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. And the code of ethics exists for a reason as well. And so if folks think that there is a violation, I believe there's been a violation of the code of ethics, you can email professionalstandards@miamire.com to start the complaint process for an ethics complaint, right? Same thing for if you believe that there's discrimination, right? You can absolutely file an ethics complaint based on that as well. So yes, very, very, yes. What else can you do?
Okay. One last point. It says the broker didn't respond. I feel like the big issue here is that a lot of brokers and listing agents just don't have the foundation of knowing how to adequately do a Section 8 deal. So the unknown gets scary. So I think we just all need to do our part and just if we can individually get better at working with Section 8, we can spread the knowledge. And ideally, we'll get to the point where listing agents and selling or renting agents all have this information we need to know, and then we'll have a problem solved. Because it's not the sellers or property owners denying these offers, it's the listing agents not know how to properly present them for success.
Well, let me also say this. I've seen fair housing complaints cases, right, litigation filed against our members who fail to respond to offers, right? I have seen cases filed against members who fail to respond, their brokers and their agents. So if you're treating people differently based on, you get, if you have a listing for a rental and you get, 10 offers, and you respond to the ones that don't have a Section 8 voucher tied to them, and you never respond to any of the Section 8 inquiries that you get on any of your rental listings, that's a fair housing complaint waiting to happen. It's fair housing discrimination because you're treating somebody in a protected class differently than you're treating the others, right? So you can't just have a policy that's like, yeah, everybody apply, right? Put your application in writing and apply and send it over. You can't just have that policy. You have to have an implementation of it that also complies with fair housing law, right? So if you always deny a Section 8 tenant or a Section 8 voucher holder, and you never ever rent to them, like that will be used against you, right? So, if you get dragged into litigation, all of these things will come out in litigation. Some of the evidence that came out in the Long Island Divided piece was, whose phone calls are you returning, right? Are you returning John Doe's phone calls and not someone else's? Or if you know somebody has a voucher and you're not returning those calls, that's also having a discriminatory effect because you're effectively denying someone access. So, yeah. Let's see. All right. So make sure you're going to jump in.
Yeah, I didn't realize I was on mute. I just want to address one last thing that just came up. A lot of people are talking about the whole working with clients with arrest. How are they finding out that they got it? If it's not a felony conviction, how do they know? I feel like I get this call a lot, is you're calling the listing agent and asking, hey, I have a client that got arrested, but they didn't get convicted. Why are you telling them that? That is none of their business. The applications that I've seen all say, have you ever been convicted of a felony, yes or no? They don't ask if you've ever been arrested. They don't ask if you've been charged with a misdemeanor. It specifically says, have you been charged with a felony? If they have not been charged with a felony, do not bring it up. They're not asking that. They're not going to ask, well, what if they any arrest though? If they do, it's a different situation. But
I think coming up, I think that probably comes up because of tenant screening reports that folks run, that they'll pull, right, all of the cases, because it's public record in Florida, at least. You can go and see cases that were filed, but, if the prosecution didn't move forward, if they were no prossed, if they were dismissed, like if you were acquitted, right, you went to trial and you were acquitted, all of those different scenarios that can come out of a criminal case, but never actually lead to a conviction, those will still show up on a tenant screening report. So, yeah. So also be mindful of that if you are working with tenant screening reports. Both from the landlord and the tenant side, right? Because if you're on the landlord side and you have the listing, part of the best practices on this checklist is, look at the criminal history last, right? Let it be a sort of a safety valve. Consider everything else before you consider that. And if you do consider that, make sure that there are guardrails up around it, right? Like not so far back that it doesn't make sense. Don't consider arrest, make every determination on a case-by-case basis, consider the mitigating circumstances, and again, look at that last and don't just automatically reject someone based on it. We had a tenants bill of rights in Miami-Dade County for a hot minute before the Florida legislature, and that's still on here, but that we do have a tenants bill of rights, but it doesn't really it was gutted basically by the Florida legislature when it preempted all the local tenants bill of rights. So we don't have we in effect don't have a local tenants bill of rights here anymore. One of those did add protections on criminal records and how that was done. And the way it was done was effective. The way that it was allowed to be done is what I'm telling you, which is look at that last, make sure you have some guardrails up around it, right? Look at the rest of the application first, so that it's, you know, you're complying with best practices. And, you know, you're not going to get that like justifiable business exception to a fair housing claim if you're not doing all of these things. You can say whatever you want to say, but if you don't have the receipts to back it up, you know, good luck in court trying to prove that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Also, I'm crafty. So on the flip side, if I'm the tenant's agent or the buyer's agent, I present the offer in a strategic way. So if I see that my screening report says misdemeanor, 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 arrest, but no felony convictions, even tell me if I should not be doing this. What I've done before is I've just submitted the whole offer package without the background check, let them like it and ask me for the background check. I'm like, oh crap, my bad. And then I send it. And then now we can just go back and forth and I can explain, look, but these aren't felony convictions. This is Florida, right? In Florida, you're innocent until proven guilty. And if I'm not mistaken, the law actually says it has to be a felony conviction for you to make a decision off of it. They could still get a job with this. They could still, no?
No.
It does not say that? Oh, see, I'm
No,
glad we're having this
no,
talk.
yes, not legal advice or representation. However,
Right.
but the law in Florida is not like there is no criminal there's no criminal conviction protection under fair housing law, like per se, right?
Yeah.
And same thing with job, like some places have a ban the box on employment applications and things like that. But generally speaking, right, that is something that an employer can, or a landlord can look at, especially if there are underlying concerns, right, like working with the public or, you know, in a fiduciary position or things like that. That can come up, but yeah, but what you're, but the
yeah.
go ahead.
Could you see if the potential tenant with the background situation, if they could do like an extra security deposit? I've had success with that before. Is that okay to do?
Well, yeah, I mean, so backing up, right? What you're doing, like sending over packages, and sending the criminal record, if any, last, that there's nothing prohibiting what you're doing. And it's effectively doing what I'm telling landlords to do anyway, or, you know, agents working with landlords to do anyway, right? Look at it last. You're just making sure that happens. In terms of remind me of the other question, the other piece of the question that you just asked that fell out of my head.
What we were just talking about was people with criminal background. Oh, I will ask them if they can, because I like to, if I feel like it's going to be riskier for the landlord, because usually the owner's worried about background because they think they're going to go back to jail. So a bigger deposit sweetens the deal for them because now you have another month of funds to help you find another tenant if something happens.
Yeah, so if I'm on the landlord side, I would be really hesitant to advise our folks working with landlords to do that. Why? Because you are treating a group of people differently based on not a protected class per se, which is a criminal record, as a disparate impact on a protected class, which could be race, right? As we're going to look at in that HUD memo. So if you're requiring folks with a criminal record to pay more of a security deposit, your policies really aren't the same for everyone. So now if you're representing the tenant and you're working with the tenant and you make that and you offer that, you know, the landlord can say yes or no, right? You're offering, it's not coming from the landlord. So a little bit of a distinction there.
Yeah, so when you first get your new client, a tenant, a buyer, whatever, you need to understand and assess their full situations. You should not be figuring out their background or credit situation halfway down the line after you done show them 3 houses. In your initial meeting, find out their credit, their income, their background, everything you need to know that may hinder them getting approved so you can come together and give them a game plan. So in our first meeting, I'm discussing the eligibility to see, can we really do this? Would you be able to do an extra deposit? Could you do a little more a month? Do you have funds available now? Could you get someone to maybe write something to vouch for you that maybe is a third? Anything you can do, get it all together then. So now when you're sending offers, you're sending heavy hitter offers. And when you start working, you can turn them up a notch. You can't just send regular offers and ask people, will you accept my offer before you? You'll be surprised how many calls I get on my listings asking if I would accept your offer before you go show it. I get so angry and I say no. I say go show it, present your offer, I will present it. I can't tell you yes or no in advance. I can tell you to apply.
Yeah. I mean, and that's going to be my next point too, right? If you get a call like, hey, I've got a customer with,
Just got out of
you know,
jail. They'll just throw it at
whatever.
you. Like,
Yeah. So they just got out of jail, right? Will you rent to him?
will you rent
Will
to
you rent
him?
to him?
I'm not even the owner. I don't show it to him. Show it to him. Advocate.
Yeah. And what about, I've got a customer with a voucher. Will you rent to them?
Show it to them. Show it to them. Send me an offer. We will definitely overview the application. But whether they have a voucher or not, if they just got out of a felony conviction and there's two applicants and the other one is about to go into a felony conviction, I can't say yes or no. A lot goes into this. So there's a lot of variables we need to talk about here. Do they have
Yeah.
7 dogs that aren't service animals? They're just 7 dogs. That applies. A lot. I need more information. Show it, send me an offer. I will present it. Just know I will not turn away. Everyone's welcome to apply to my listings.
Yes, and that is the magic language, because you'll get pushed, right? Like, well, but I don't want to have to pay a fee, and I don't want to waste their time. I don't want to waste your time, Khalid. Just tell me yes or no.
Show it. I mean, I understand if you don't have the time for your client, maybe one of my agents have time for them and you could just send them over, but I cannot, I haven't seen anything. Just because they're using a voucher isn't a license to be accepted. They're treated like everyone else. They have to apply like everyone else.
Yeah.
Their agent should show
Yeah.
them properties like everyone else.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you phrased it beautifully, because if you say no over the phone, email, or I've even seen social media, like, get this, I've seen fair housing cases filed where some people are chatting in Facebook Messenger. Okay, they're in Facebook Messenger going back and forth about someone else's listing, right? Like, if they've advertised someone else's listing on Facebook and somebody gets them in a conversation about it, right? And they say, no, Section 8 or something like that in Facebook Messenger. I've seen people sued over that. I've seen people
Oh,
sued over it.
I had an old broker get sued because, okay, to advertise listings, you can put them online and put them here, put them there. A lot of agents, they will just copy the remarks that agent typed and paste them. And if there's a fair housing violation in their remarks and you shared it, but your post is what offended someone, you're getting that fair housing violation, not the listing agent. They're probably going to find out about it and change it real quick, unless you bring them in and say they said it too. But you just got to be really careful. This is not the Wild West. You can't just come out here shooting out offers and doing whatever you want. You got to care, get better, do the right thing and do it well.
Yeah, because I've seen so many lawsuits just like that, Khalid.
They're
it's
just
messy
firing
out.
out. They're just copying listings without even reading them. Some people even get an assistant and say, hey, post 10 properties a day. The assistant doesn't even know what they're looking for. You have to look over these things.
Yeah. Yep. So moving along to the next piece, this is that HUD memo that I mentioned around criminal records, right? And if you want the full HUD memo, this is the first page of it. But Florida providers, housing providers, not just real estate agents, but landlords in general, they've been sued in hundreds of cases for refusing prior felony tenants. So make sure that you've read this memo, you understand it, and so keep that handy. And a good question in the chat. The
I
good
get a
question
lot
that
of people call and say, hey, I have tenants, but they don't have documents. They're here on work. They don't have a social. How do we, I don't see a reason to not take that client if they have income, but what is the law? Because I know the whole laws in Florida. What do we do?
Well, don't take my word for it. So there's a couple questions in the chat. One is, and I'm going to read it just in case folks are not in a place to read it, or if you're watching this later. The question is, I don't see immigration status on the protected classes list. You showed us earlier. So I'm going back to it. We're back on that page. So I'm going to rephrase the wording here because people are not illegal. They might have unlawful status here in this country, but can we treat folks who are here without immigration status as, a criminal? And I would say absolutely not. We are not judges and juries in those cases. We are not the ones making adjudications on the law or facts as they apply to the law. So where does this fall on our protected classes list? Well, if we go to national origin, right, if somebody is here, however they got here, right, it could be, and by default, right? If you do not have immigration status in this country, your national origin is from another country. So I would be very mindful about your rental practices in terms of what you're doing there, because you could run into fair housing issues if you are discriminating based on national origin. And just because somebody is not here with a lawful status does not mean that they cannot bring a lawsuit. This happens all the time. All right, another question around, and we're going to get to this question now because credit score comes up all the time. Actually, before we get there, credit score comes up all the time. And I've seen this pop up a couple times in the chat, and we're going to talk about that now. So you saw in that protected classes list, is credit score on there? No, credit score is nowhere on a protected classes list. But as we've all talked about today, we can't just look at the protected classes list. We got to look at, does our business practice have an impact on a disparate impact, meaning a worse impact on a protected class. And if we're talking about credit scores, if folks have low credit scores, you know, I will say this as of, you know, today, I have not seen a lawsuit that that says, you know, you discriminated against me because of my credit score or because I'm part of this protected class that has a disparate impact on that protected class. I have not seen those lawsuits. That said, I would be very mindful about those business practices, because could it have a disparate impact on a protected class like race? Absolutely. Age, right? Like young people, like it's not that they have bad credit, they have no credit because they're young people, right? And I'm seeing it pop up in the chat. Age, yes. Absolutely, right? That could have a disparate impact on someone's age, right? Students who are younger, right? Could have a disparate impact. So would be really careful about that and phrasing that. It's not that you absolutely cannot do it, but be careful how you phrase it. Make it the last thing you look at. Look at if you're looking at credit, don't just look at a number, look at a credit report, right? In that webinar that we hosted back in 2020, a little bit of a throwback here, which is still good. We hosted an attorney that represents landlords and defends them in these cases. And you know, one piece of advice that he gave that's always stuck with me is, look, if you've got a credit score that is low and you look at the credit report and you see that it's not because of evictions or something like that, right? Well, then you know that they've been prioritizing paying their rent. They might have a low credit score, but they've been paying their rent. They might not have been paying some unsecured creditors. So, you know, they're prioritizing their rent payments. Not bad to have them as a tenant, right?
Most of the time, it's like student loans and medical bills that are just totally irrelevant. And it's like, are they really going to pay this $80,000 bill? You know, so sometimes you got to really look into it and understand why.
Right, exactly. So, and look at the full picture, right? It's always a big pic, like always look at the big picture. So, you know, if they have good income and, you know, they've got, like Khalid said, medical bills or student debt, take a look at that.
And because I know most of the people here most likely probably are working with buyers and tenants. So just on the flip side of that, again, advocacy is our biggest role here. So when you're presenting these offers, if it's worth the time to print out their credit report and go through with a highlighter and highlight everything that's really causing it to be where it is and show how minimal it is, that's important. If you can go through their bank statements with a highlighter and show, here's $3,000, $5,000, like little things like that. You just want to highlight the good, so what some may see as a negative isn't that noticeable. Just push it way in the back down there. I'm not saying to hide or cover up information. I'm just saying bring the positive up front, so that the, say, negative credit report or the negative background report is like deep in like the last attachment they look at, and they got to look for like, oh, well, I mean, that's not that bad considering everything else I just saw, you know? So stop calling agents and letting us know the worst parts of your clients first. Stop.
Yeah, that I always love when you say that, Khalid, because it makes it's such a common sense piece of advice, but you know, you have to like hear it to be like, oh yeah.
They just don't want to waste gas driving to show it. And then I get it, but like, send the offer before you show it. Send the offer subject to seeing the interior, but don't ask me if I'll take your client and give me all of your client's personal business. I don't even know their income. You didn't tell me, you won't tell me their income, their credit, none of that. You just said they just got out of jail. It doesn't work. It never works.
Right.
Have you ever gotten a deal closed like that? No.
Right. So, so Another question that we got, or a comment in the chat, is oftentimes it's the HOAs that require a certain credit score. And yeah, that is a problem, right? And HOAs are not exempt. They're covered by fair housing laws as well. And I will readily admit that a lot of the issues that we see that come across my desk at the association are HOAs who are not behaving in very ethical or legal ways when it comes to fair housing discrimination, right? We've seen, all sorts of condo docs that have things in them that need to be amended and haven't yet, right? And having things built into it like no Section 8 or no children, right? Like that's a big one that will be built into condo docs, no kids or something like that. Just because the HOA is discriminating doesn't give you a get out of jail free card on liability. So if you see that, right, if you see the HOA is discriminating, have your customer report them to Hope Fair Housing or the county's process on fair housing violations, right? You may not end up getting that unit for your customer because of the way the timeline works out, and these cases move slower than we'd like, but you might open the door for somebody else behind you who sees the same thing. So if you are seeing these issues, refer them to Hope, refer them to legal services, because you don't want to be complicit in that fair housing discrimination. Give your customers the tools and make it clear that it's the HOA and not you. All right, so next, this is also an oldie but a goodie that we do need to bring up, because website compliance. This was a huge area of litigation and demand letters in 2020. There were attorneys going around sending thousands of demand letters to our members saying that that our members are committing fair housing violations because their websites allegedly were not ADA compliant. This was we're being recorded, so I will refrain from all the adjectives I'd like to use, but I will say that this was definitely, a racket, right? Like this was clearly, let me send out as many demand letters as possible. Let me see how much we can settle for. Very few cases were actually filed in court back in 2020 with these cases, and most of them, thank you, advocacy team and RPAC. We advocated with Florida Realtors on getting this shut down. NAR actually got involved. We raised it to NAR's attention as well as Florida Realtors, and they got involved sending cease and desist letters to the attorney who was sending these thousands of letters to our members, and it eventually stopped. But every now and then we do see some of these cases come up, and if you want to refresh your recollection on how to make sure that your websites are ADA compliant, you can watch the webinar that we did with Joanna Watkins, that's Florida Realtors General Counsel, on how to get your website into compliance or take it down, frankly. And these are some other tools that you can implement. You can put widgets, make sure you fix your websites. There are compliance programs that you can run it against, like with the WebAIM that we have cited here on the screen. It's wave.webaim.org. You can also visit the resources that Florida Realtors put together on this as well. And I forgot that I had included NAR's response to the law firm that was sending out all of these demand letters. So that was definitely a huge advocacy win. All right, now let's see. The questions, if you have questions, this is my information. If you want to reach out to us for a faster response, you can even email legal@miamire.com. You'll get the entire legal department. And I'm going to take a moment now to go through some FAQs before we wrap. So there's some random questions about, are there any guidelines around requiring any guidelines with regard to tenant responsibility for minor repairs and the amount that they are responsible for. So if the lease is silent, well, I'll just answer this generally speaking, again, not legal advice or representation, but Florida law does under Chapter 83, Part 2, that's the Florida Landlord Tenant Law. That's Florida Landlord Tenant Act. Those are the landlord tenant laws. that's sort of the foundation for landlord-tenant relationships, residential landlord-tenant relationships in Florida. There are provisions in there about what the tenant's responsible for, what the landlord's responsible for, right? And then your lease can build on that. You can build in additional stuff. You can't take away someone's rights under law. So what does that look like? Yeah, sometimes there are different provisions around repairs, who's responsible for what, up to how much. We can't dictate that because all business decisions are made unilaterally and independently, including those. So, so you want to make sure that those are considered on an individual basis with your customers and your clients.
I just have
All
a
right.
pro tip because I do property management. If your property owner comes to you and says, I want the tenant to fix everything or as much as possible, even when they want the tenant to replace AC filters, I always advise the owner to take all repairs into their own hands, because when a tenant is responsible for repairs like this, they're not going to fix it as urgently as you will. That leak is going to keep leaking until it's a flood. Then you got to fix it right now. If their lease says we will not refix anything under 50, they're going to wait until it costs 75. So stop doing that. The AC filters, they might not change those AC filters and you won't realize it until it's time to replace your AC. So definitely do not put the care of, advise your owners to not put the care of their property in the tenant's hands if they can afford it. If they want to be hands off and not pay for anything, advise them to consider a commercial investment with a triple net lease where the tenants will pay for everything. But this is residential. Protect your properties. Even the grass. They won't water your grass. They are not cutting their grass.
Well, we don't know, and we will, and we also need to remind everyone that all business decisions are made unilaterally and independently. And so those are all decisions that have to be made on a case-by-case basis with your owners based on the unique facts and circumstances, right? So we're not advocating for any one business model,
right?
But yes, lots of things to consider. So yeah, that looks like it's a wrap, Khalid, from the chat. And just in closing, really appreciate everyone being here today for Fair Housing Month. Really important that you're here. Really important that you're getting the information and tools that you need to comply with fair housing laws. And Khalid, anything else to close?
Robin says we didn't answer her question, so I'm looking for it. It was a criminal question. Robin.
Well, Khalid, I'm going to jump in because we did answer the question about. Yeah, we talked and so the recording is going to be.
I see it. I got it. The owner is telling you that they can't be associated with criminal background advocacy. You just have to explain the difference between a felony conviction and just a simple arrest. And if they can't see it your way, you might have to not take that listing.
Well, I mean, and there's, and the question is, right, like, what if somebody is, oh, wait, hold on. That was the wrong question. Let me go back up.
But I just don't want them to get an offer where someone has like a unpaid traffic ticket and they got arrested and you can't get that offer accepted. You need to be able to talk to your owner and understand that they'll see the vision. And
so there's yeah. So that question, I thought it was another question, but no, I'm seeing the question now. And the question that I was seeing is, what if there's a conviction? And we talked about that earlier in the webinar. So if you want to re-listen to that, go watch the webinar again because it talks about that. But the question is that, this is a question about, someone wanting to rent out a home and they work for the Department of State. So the owner works for the Department of State and they're saying they can't be associated with anybody with a criminal record. How would I handle that? And the tenant screening? Well, again, you're going to want to, I can't provide legal advice or representation. So you're going to want to get advice on this from your own attorney or call the Florida Realtors Legal Hotline. I can say that, questions that you might want to be asking are, where does it say that they're not allowed to be associated with someone with a criminal record, right? I want a lot of things in life, but that doesn't mean that I'm entitled to them, right? Or just because I want something, just because I don't want to be, if the owner doesn't want to be associated with something, where does the law say that they can do that? Right? Like, ask those questions. I'm not aware of a law that says, you work for the Department of State, therefore you get to say nobody with a criminal record. I don't know of any carve-outs like that in the law. And it goes back to what Khalid was saying earlier, right? Do you want to be complicit in a fair housing lawsuit? Because you're not going to get a get out of jail free card when the lawsuit comes knocking. You're going to get pulled into it as a real estate licensee, and so is your brokerage. So if they're,
Yeah, even if you say, oh, it's because of that misdemeanor arrest, but they feel like it's really because of the color of their skin or something else, they feel that way. So now you have to fight and explain why this misdemeanor arrest is really the reason you denied it. So what I would say is I don't believe they mean your tenant. I think they mean don't be in the car driving down the street with 3 felons. So I would suggest maybe they consider getting a property management company. Now you don't have to talk to that person if that's what this is about. I'll manage it. Your license lets you manage. And that's how I would handle it. This was great.
Yeah.
I'm gonna miss
Yeah.
you guys.
Again, well, we'll be back for sure, Khalid, mostly because Kevin will keep us on track with these. Thank you again, Kevin. Thank you again to our wonderful education team. And thank you to all of you for being members, to stay up to date with all the resources, including the resources that you saw today, the slides. You can go to miamirealtors.com/legal updates. Thanks, everyone.
And I will help you with your rental deals, but stop giving me all of your Section 8 deals. Why are you doing that? I'm here to help you do it. Call me and ask me questions, but don't say, hey, I have a client, can you close them? I get offended. Stop it. Thank you.
I'm going to let you take those offline, Khalid. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
If I'm on my way home, yeah. Wouldn't it be crazy? Don't you still amaze me? Wouldn't it be crazy? Don't you still amaze me? Wouldn't it be crazy? Don't you still amaze me? Wouldn't it be crazy? Don't you still amaze me? If I'm on my way home, yeah.